So it's a pleasure to have Ashok Sen, who will tell us about the instant and amplitudes in string theory. Please, Ashok.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation and the introduction. Okay. So this is the title of my talk, The Instant on Amplitudes in String Theory. And so here is a plan. So I'll try to give a long introduction to the problem, okay, that we face in dealing with the instant on amplitudes. Okay. Then I'll describe the solution via string field theory. This is a general procedure for finding the solution via string field theory. And then I'll illustrate with some example. And then I'll end with some final remarks. And most of what I'll be talking about are contained in these two papers. Okay. So let me then begin by introducing the problem that we have. So we start at the beginning of string theory, okay, so energy on amplitude. Now, as you know, amplitudes in string perturbation theory are usually expressed as integrals over the moduli spaces of Riemann surfaces with punctures. But these integrals typically often run into divergences. And here is the simplest example, which is also the earliest example of string amplitudes, the Venetian amplitude. It was originally written as ratios of gamma functions, but it's more appropriate to write it as a worldsheet integral. And this is the integral that one gets, okay, for the Venetian amplitude, representing four open string tachyon amplitudes in bosonic string theory. And now if you look at this, you can see that it diverges for certain range of momentum. Okay, whenever 2p1.p2 is less than or equal to -1, or 2p2.p3 is less than or equal to -1, okay, this integral diverges either from y equal to 0 end or y equal to 1 end. Okay. And my notation here is mostly plus signature metric. Okay, so S is essentially p1 plus p2 minus p1 plus p2 square. Okay, so this corresponds to large S and this corresponds to large T. Now the conventional viewpoint that one takes here is that we define the amplitudes in the range when it's well defined, namely 2p1.p2 larger than -1 and 2p2.p3 larger than -1. And then we analytically continue the result to other kinematic regions. Now what I'll be describing is a somewhat different viewpoint of this same problem that is provided by string field theory, which will be equivalent, but it's somewhat different and it's more easily generalizable to cases where the analytic continuation fails. So let me just say here just one sentence about string field theory, that it's a regular quantum field theory, which typically has infinite number of fields. And it's designed so that the Feynman diagrams of the theory formally reproduce the amplitudes that we get from the worldsheet formalism. The difference, however, is that in string field theory, we have clear physical interpretation of the divergences, where they come from and how to repair them. So for this, you have to understand a little more detail about the relationship between the string field theory Feynman diagrams and the integration over the moduli space of Riemann surfaces. And this comes by using the Schwinger parameter representation of a propagator. So in a normal quantum field theory, you write the Schwinger parameter representation in this way. Yes, we introduce this integral over the proper time. And here I have also introduced the variable q, which is related to the proper time s by q equal to the minus s. And in terms of q, this integral takes a form like this. So in string field theory, of course, it has infinite number of fields. And the role of k square plus m square is played by the eigenvalues of L0. And the analog of the Schwinger parameter representation for in string field theory will be to write it as an operator equation. Namely, L0 inverse is integral dq q to the L0 minus 1. And you can recover these as matrix elements of this equation between the different states. Now, when you translate the string field theory Feynman diagrams to the worldsheet language, it's the Schwinger parameters q which become the moduli of Riemann surfaces. And all the divergences that we encountered in the worldsheet formalism are the ones that we get in the language of string field theory from the q goes to 0 limit. So for this reason, we'll now explore the divergences as q goes to 0 limit in a little more detail. So here is the same relation again. Now you can see that this equation is an identity as long as you are considering states with positive L0. Okay, this integral is perfectly well defined and the value is L0 inverse. But for negative L0, the left hand side remains perfectly finite, but the right hand side diverges. Okay, it diverges from the Q goes to 0n. And string field theory in these cases, it instructs us to use the left hand side. Because after all, from the perspective of string field theory, this is the value of this is the propagator. And the reason that you get these divergences from the Q equal to 0n is simply because you have made a wrong use of Schwinger parameterization, okay, where you shouldn't have used. Okay, and in the previous language, this corresponds to using this relation for negative k square plus m square. Yeah, and they are clearly again, this is divergent, whereas this is perfectly finite. And I should just add that this is equivalent to analytic continuation when analytic continuation is available. And finally, if we consider the L0 equal to 0 states, then you see that the both sides diverge. Okay, this is of course 1 over 0, which is infinite, and this is algebraically divergent. So here, string field theory directly doesn't tell you what to do. But what it tells us is that these divergences, the logarithmic divergences, reflect the presence of on-shell states in the internal lines of a Feynman diagram. Because this is really coming from the 1 over L0, that's the propagator. Now, in such cases, we can use string field theory to identify the physical origin of these states. Okay? Because whenever an internal line of a Feynman diagram goes on-shell, typically you can identify the physical reason for why that's happening. And then we use the insights from normal quantum field theory to deal with these divergences. Okay? Because in normal quantum field theory, typically when an internal line is on-shell, we know what's going wrong and how to repair it. And we'll say some examples later. So today we are going to discuss a specific situation where the analytic continuation fails. And here we really need to invoke string field theory to make sense of the divergences. And these have to do with D-Instanton contribution to string amplitudes. So I'll now try to describe what are the problems that we face while computing D-Instanton amplitudes. So let me remind you that D-instantons are D-branes with Dirichlet boundary condition on all non-compact directions. And this includes also the Euclidean time. Okay, so this is the definition of D-instanton we are going to use. So in particular, it also involves Euclidean branes which are wrapped along compact directions. As long as there are on all the non-compact directions, you have put Dirichlet boundary condition. Okay, so there's a really finite action solutions. And the physical interpretation of D-instantons is that they are saddle points of the Euclidean path integral, and they give non-perturbative contribution to string amplitudes. So we can study them. We can calculate amplitudes in presence of D-instantons in the standard way, okay, as you do for D-branes. However, the problem that we face here is that the open strings that live on the D-instanton do not carry any continuous momentum, because we have imposed Dirichlet boundary condition on all the non-compact directions. Okay, so the momenta along compact directions are discrete. Momenta along the non-compact directions are continuous, but because we have introduced Dirichlet boundary condition along those directions, those momenta identically vanish. And this means that we cannot move away from the singularities by simply varying the external momentum. Like, for example, in this here, we could analytically continue, okay, even if we encounter a situation where k square plus m square is negative, we can first define it for a value of k where this is positive and then analytically continue to negative values. Okay, that's essentially the main point of analytic continuation. Okay. But that is not available, okay, simply because of the fact that we cannot move away from the singularities. And often one can argue that the divergent parts cancel, provided of course we choose suitably regulators first, but the finite parts that remain after the cancellation become ambiguous. Okay, because you are really subtracting two infinities, and that can leave behind a finite ambiguity. So we are going to study this in the context of bosonic string theory in 2 dimensions. But the method we described can be applied to any string theory. Okay, I'll describe why we want to study bosonic string theory in 2 dimensions. Okay. But this is I want to emphasize that the methods are not restricted to this. Okay, that's general. So what is bosonic string theory in 2 dimensions? Okay, so here the worldsheet theory contains a free scalar x that describes a time coordinate, and a Liouville field theory with central charge 25. So total central charge adds up to 26. These are central charge 25 because there's a linear dilaton background in the Liouville field theory. Okay. So even though you have a single scalar field, okay, you really have. So total central charge adds up to 26. Okay, that cancels all the anomalies on the worldsheet. And furthermore, in this case, the usual closed string tachyon that we see in the bosonic string theory become a massless state of the theory. And that's again related to the fact that there is a linear dilaton background in the Liouville direction. So in the 90s, people studied perturbative amplitudes in this, and they found correspondence between this theory and a matrix model. But more recently, in this paper, okay, these 3 authors, Baltazar, Rodriguez, and Nin, they computed the d-instanton contribution to the 2-point amplitude of closed string tachyons in this theory. And then they compared that with what you get from the matrix model. Okay, and we'll see, I'll describe later what kind of agreement they found. Okay. But the reason that this model is interesting is precisely because there's a dual matrix model description, and that gives the exact results. And that's what they compared the results with. Okay. And so the idea is that if we develop a formalism for computing amplitudes in the presence of d-instantons, then we should first test it in situations where the results are known. And this is one example where the result is known. Okay, and that's our interest in studying this particular model. Okay, even though the methods will be general. So let me now describe some of the results that BRY found. So remember that we are considering one instanton contribution to 2-point function. So the leading contribution in that analysis comes from the product of 2 disk 1-point functions. So on the boundary of the disk, you put this boundary, the d-instanton boundary condition. So these crosses represent closed string vertex operators. And this is the expression that they found. And so I'll explain these various factors that appear in this expression. So GS here is the string coupling constant. And you see this e to the minus 1 over GS. Okay, this is basically the exponential of the negative of the instanton action. Okay, so 1 over GS is the instanton action. Okay. So we have a suppression by e to the minus the instanton action. This is the energy conserving delta function. So omega minus omega 1 and omega 2 are the energies of the incoming and outgoing tachyons. So this is the energy conserving delta function. These factors, okay, these factors come from the 1-point function on the disk. These are in fact coming from the Liouville directions. So because there are two such things, you have 2 such factors. Now it's important to count the powers of GS. Okay, that this is not multiplied by any factor of GS, and the way the counting goes is that each disk comes with a factor of 1 over G string, okay, because it has Euler number 1. Okay, so that's the GS to the minus chi, that's the factor 1 over G string. And each closed string vertex operator carries the factors of factor of G string. Okay. So this gives you 1 over G string times G string, that's 1. This is 1 over G string times G string, that's 1. Okay. So you see that besides this factor, there is no other factor of G string in this expression. N here is an overall normalization constant, and naively it's given by this I is the standard factor that appears in the expression for the S matrix in any string amplitude. Okay, so I'll not say very much more about this I. And then you have this exponential of the annulus partition function. And the reason that this comes is because since annulus has Euler number 0, it has no factors of GS. And since you're not inserting any vertex operator, okay, that also doesn't give any factor of GS. So annulus is really of order GS to the 0, okay, which means inserting factors of the annulus, okay, doesn't cost any coupling constant. So you should really sum over all possible insertions of the annulus, okay, and that gives the exponential of the annulus partition function. So that's part of this normalization N. And here I have written down the explicit expression for the annulus partition function in this two-dimensional string theory, which is here. And here you see the first example of a divergence that we encountered in this problem. This is divergent from the t goes to infinity end. And there is no adjustable parameter in which you can do analytic continuation. Okay, it's just a divergent integral. Okay, it's not a function of anything that you can analytically compute.
Sorry, Ashok, but the fact that you have a disconnected set of surfaces, does it mean that the incident contribution is to the disconnected part of the two-point function?
Oh, okay, I'm coming to that. And in the next, just wait for the next slide. So even though it's disconnected, you see that you don't separate energy conserving delta function, right? There is a single delta function. So let me go to the next slide. I think that will make things clearer. Okay. So here you have a disconnected contribution, right? As we just said. Now, naively, we don't include disconnected worldsheet in the string computation because a disconnected diagram like this will have one factor of delta omega 1 from here and another factor of delta omega 2 from here. The reason that that doesn't happen here is because of the Dirichlet boundary condition, okay, on the d instanton. The energy conservation, in fact, is not part of this disk amplitude. That's why the disk amplitude by itself doesn't have energy conserving delta function. That energy conserving delta function is restored at the end. It comes at the end after we integrate over the collective coordinate, describing the position of the d instanton. Okay, and this, of course, we'll discuss in detail later. But because there is no separate energy conserving delta function, this contributes as much as a connected diagram. Okay, there is no way to exclude this from the analysis. Similarly, the annulus partition function, arbitrary insertions of number of annuli, is also possible. So they're naively okay. Naively, or that's a vacuum diagram, right? So you should just ignore it. Okay, that will because it will cancel the denominator. But what happens here is that because this is the d instanton contribution, you are supposed to add the perturbative contribution to the amplitude and the d instanton contribution to the amplitude, and then divide by the bubble sum of all bubbles. So the annulus actually gives a relative contribution between the perturbative amplitude and the d instanton amplitude. And that's why the exponential of the annulus also has to be included, because that's essentially normalizing the amplitude with respect to the perturbative contribution. And this is the reason we include disconnected diagrams.
So there is no incident correction from a single disk with two insertions of the vertex operator?
Yes, there is. That's next order. I'm going to count.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do the counting. Yeah. So here is the next order. I think this is what you wanted to see, right? Yeah. So at the next order, okay, that means at order G string, there will be three separate contributions. Okay, one is the two-point function on the disk, that's here. So this is the expression for the two-point function on the disk. Okay, and you got the important point here. You see that one disk gives you 1 over G string, and two vertex operators each carries a factor of G string. So this contribution is actually of order G string, right? And you see this G string over here. So the way I have written this result is that there is this part is in fact the street level, the leading contribution. Okay, so I've normalized this with respect by the leading contribution. And whatever is left, there is an explicit factor of GS I have written down. And the rest I am calling this function F, which is a function of omega 1 and omega 2. So BRY computed this. In fact, it's a very complicated expression involving integration over the Liouville momentum. But what they found is that you can write this as a sum of two terms. One is a finite expression, okay, which you can do. I mean, they evaluated it on the computer. Okay, there is no closed analytic form for this. And then there is a divergent part, which you see here. Okay, this is the divergent piece. And this divergence comes from the y goes to 0 end. So the y here essentially is the distance between one of the vertex operators from the boundary. So the y goes to 0 divergence is when one of the vertex operators approaches the boundary. Okay, that's the divergence. And now you see that this exponent here, okay, doesn't depend on any energy, right? And that has to do with the fact that the open strings don't carry any energy, right? Open strings do not carry continuous energy or momentum. So this exponent is fixed. And this means that we cannot tame these divergences by simply deforming the omega i's. That you really have to tackle these divergences head on and not via analytic continuation. So at this stage, we will do the best we can. Okay, we'll just parameterize this. You see that first term is independent of energy. I'll write this as a constant AF. And then I'll write this as another constant BF times omega 1 omega 2. That's also divergent. This is in fact logarithmically divergent. And then F finite, I'll leave as it is. Then the next contribution is a product of this one-point function and annulus one-point function. So this is one diagram, and then of course you have one-to exchange, and again you can count the powers of G string. This is 1 over G string times G string, so this is order G string to the 0. And here you have annulus gives you no power of G string, and one vortex operator insertion gives you factor of G string. So this is of order G string, and this is also of order G string. And again, I have written it by normalizing it by the leading contribution. So this is the leading contribution. Then there is a factor of G string. And then I have a sum of these two functions. Okay, one from this amplitude, so G omega 2 is from this amplitude, and G omega 1 is from the one where O1 and 2 are exchanged. Again, this function G omega was computed by BRY, and then expressed as the sum of a divergent part and a finite piece. So this, in fact, you can see it has double divergences. It's a double integral. Okay, so V roughly, or log V, is the length of the annulus. So V goes to 0 divergences when the annulus becomes long and thin. And X is the distance of the vortex operator from the boundary. Okay, so X goes to 0 divergence is when the vortex operator goes to the boundary. So this has divergences both from X equal to 0 end and V equal to 0 end. These again cannot be handled by analytic continuation. So you basically write this as a sum of a constant, okay, and then another constant times omega square. And then a finite piece, of course, can be computed numerically. And the final diagram is a product of two d one-point functions and a 0-point function on a surface of order number -1. So there are in fact two such surfaces. One is a disk with 2 holes, and another one is a torus with 1 hole. Okay, here I have drawn only one of them, a disk with 2 holes. Okay, the other one will again contain the product of two disk one-point functions and a torus with 1 hole. So here these are of order Gs to the 0, and this gives you some constant times Gs, right? Because you have this gives you 1 over Gs, and every hole introduces a factor of G string. Okay, that's of order Gs. So that's what I've written here. Okay. Again, I have normalized by the leading contribution. Okay, so this is the leading contribution. Okay, so you can add up the results, okay, and get the total result to order G string. Okay, this is what it is. And so what BRY did is that they evaluated these finite parts numerically, and then they compared this with the known result in the matrix model, and that allowed them to determine these combinations, AF plus 2AG plus C and DF minus 2BG. Okay, so they found the best fit values of these constants, this combination of constants. But in worldsheet description, of course, they are divergent, okay, because each of these are divergent integrals. So I'm going to generalize this analysis a little bit more and then state what the values that they found. So the original published result gave only two constants, right? This combination over here, the first combination over here, and the second combination. But it turns out that using exactly the same functions, okay, without doing any extra work, we can also get the expression for the n-point function of closed string tachyon at this order. So the leading contribution here again comes from the product of n disk one-point functions, okay, because each disk one-point function is of order Gs to the 0. Okay. So you just take the product of n disk one-point functions, you still get Gs to the 0, okay, and this is the expression you find. Okay, you can easily recognize the same normalization constant n, the same instant on action. Okay. This is the energy conserving delta function that we have. And these are just contributions from individual one-point functions, okay, the Liouville part. So here I have just written it as a one in a somewhat simplified version. So at the next order, there are three kinds of diagrams. One is n minus 2 disk 1 point function and one disk 2 point function. Then you have n minus 1 disk 1 point function and one annulus 1 point function. And then finally n disk 1 point function and a 0 point function on surface of order number -1. Now, of course, in this case, there are more general diagrams, right? You could have, for example, n minus 3 disk 1 point function and one disk 3 point function. But that diagram, you can easily convince yourself that is of order GS square, right? Because the disk 1 point functions give GS to the 0. But if you have one disk 3 point function, then this gives 1 over GS, and the three vertex operators each carry a factor of GS. So that's of order GS square. So at this order, at order GS, we really have exactly the same data that we needed for the 2 point function to this order, right? Namely, we need the disk 2 point function, the annulus 1 point function, and the 0 point function on surface of order number -1. And so one can easily now write down the result. Okay, we see that this is the result. Okay, this is the leading contribution over here. Then there is a factor of GS. And here you recognize that we are basically having to sum over all pairs. Okay, this means all possible insertions, 2 point functions on the disk. Okay, omega and omega g are the J and K are the external states that are inserted on the disk. This is the 1 point function of the annuli, and this is the 0 point function on the surface of order number -1. And now the idea is that we can simply substitute for the F and G the same expressions that we had found earlier, and express this in terms of these unknown constants AF, BF, AG, and BG, and C. And here is what one gets. The important point to note is that now the coefficients of AF, AG, and C are n dependent, and the dependence on n is different for these three constants. So the idea is that we can now compare this with the results of the dual matrix model, which is given here. Okay, so this is the exact result that we know from the dual matrix model analysis. So you can compare these two. Okay, we know the values of these numerically, and then we can determine individually these constants AF, AG, and C, as well as this combination BG minus BF by 2. So this was done. Okay, this result, the full result is in fact not published. Okay, but this was done by BRY. Okay, they checked this and they found that these are the values that we get. Okay, so here now I have given the numerical values of the various constants that we get by comparison to the matrix model. So of this, the leading term is determined analytically, because as you can see, you just compare this leading contribution, the coefficient of 1. Okay, so here there is no numerical analysis involved. So n is determined analytically, but the rest of the constants are determined numerically. So the question you want to ask is it possible to determine this using string field theory? Okay. Because the main problem in determining these constants in string theory is because of the divergences, right? Because of the divergences that you encounter, divergences of this time that you encounter. And string field theory is supposed to be able to deal with these divergences. So let me now describe briefly the idea, okay, that we use in getting the solution. So here is the strategy. So we take the worldsheet expression for an amplitude and focus on the divergent part associated with open string degeneration, okay, which in this case corresponds to either the t goes to infinity limit that we saw, this comes in the expression for n, or y goes to 0 limit, y is the variable that appeared in the expression for this 2-point function on the disk, or this v goes to 0, x goes to 0 limits, right? This came from the 1-point function on the annulus. Then string field theory tells us how to make appropriate change of variables to express the moduli, okay, which are these t, y, v, x, etc., in terms of the string field theory Schwinger parameters, okay, which you can call q1, q2, etc. So after you make this change of variables, you will encounter divergent integrals. So all the divergences that you had found here will now appear as divergences of this kind. And now the idea is that whenever you encounter a divergent integral, a power law integral of this kind, in terms of the variable q, we interpret this as coming from an integral of the form dq q to the L0 minus 1, okay, with L0 eigenvalue minus beta. And you simply use the fact that string field theory gives actually this as 1 over L0. So you replace this by minus 1 over beta. And because we want to interpret this as a state of L0 equal to minus beta. So using this procedure, we can deal with all the power law divergences. Because all the power law divergences are of this kind, and we can simply make this replacement. Beta equal to 0 on the other hand, it requires special care because as we discussed earlier, those correspond to on-shell internal states. And there you have to be more careful in interpreting what they are coming from and making appropriate amendments. So when you encounter divergent integrals of this form, we know that they are coming from the zero modes. And as we have already discussed earlier, that these cannot be treated using Feynman diagrams. Okay, you don't, whenever you encounter an internal on-shell propagator, okay, we know that the Feynman diagram is not the right way to deal with it. So the first step that we follow is to simply remove these contributions by hand. Now, in terms of the string field theory path integral, what this means is that we are unintegrating them. So you are not carrying out path integral over these, which will using the Feynman diagram techniques. So it corresponds to unintegrating these the path integrals. Then you have to find the physical origin of these modes, okay, what they represent, and then you treat them accordingly. And this treating them accordingly basically means that we have to involve, we have to do the path integral over them explicitly, and not by Feynman diagrams, okay, because presence of on-shell propagator simply means that you cannot treat them using Feynman diagrams. Okay. And one class of examples that we encountered, okay, are the collective modes, right? D-instance of collective modes. Okay. If you try to treat them using the Feynman diagram technique, then of course you'll get 1 over 0. Okay. But you know that the collective modes have to be integrated at the end separately, and that's what you have to do. Okay. So let me now give the results that we get using the string field theory analysis. Okay, and these are all analytical results. Okay. So this line gives the results of these constants in string field theory. Okay. I should say that this part, this C equal to 0, okay, this is an indirect argument. This is not really a full-fledged string field theory calculation. Okay. So even though in principle it is possible to do a full-fledged string field theory calculation, that's more complicated than the others that I have quoted here. Okay. So this has not been done. Okay, so this is an indirect argument. But the rest are genuine string field theory analysis calculations, and this is the result that we get. And here you now compare this with the matrix model result, okay, that BROI found by numerical comparison. Okay. So first of all, the n agrees, as you can see, and of these other constants, 2bg minus bf, for example, they had found this to be minus 1.4. Up to an error of order 0.01. The analytical value that one finds using string field theory is minus log 4. So that agrees. If they find on the ballpark of 0.5 with the error of 0.01, that also agrees. This at present remains an enigma. The string field theory seems to give AG equal to minus half, whereas BROI found AG equal to 0, okay, or close to 0. These are numerical results. Now, my hope is that this is just there's some mistake in the calculation somewhere, okay, and this will sooner or later be repaired. Okay. But at present, this remains an enigma. Okay, this AG, okay, the disagreement between the values of AG from string field theory perspective and from the numerical analysis comparison to the matrix model, okay, that still has not been resolved.
Ashok, can I ask a question here?
Yes, go ahead, please.
How much is this dependent on the specific non-perturbative completion that BROI used? Is it known or?
Yeah,
or
so certainly all of this depends on the non-perturbative completion that they used. Right? Okay. If you use anything else, the results will be different. Even the n may be different.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So certainly it depends. It relies on the non-perturbative contribution. The only part I think that doesn't depend on non-perturbative contribution is this 1 over GS, e to the minus 1 over GS factor.
Right.
I think everything else will depend on non-perturbative contribution, non-perturbative completion. But it seems hard to believe that all the constants would agree and except one will fail, right? Because the non-perturbative completion that they use is not correct, right? If everything failed, then I would say that okay, that must be the explanation, but that doesn't seem to me to be a reasonable explanation. That it's a failure of the particular non-perturbative completion that they used.
Do you know BG and BF separately?
Pardon?
Do you know BG and BF separately? Not only.
No, okay. Yeah, BG and BF we know separately in string field theory, right? But it turns out that BG and BF separately depends on a parameter of string field theory, which can be changed by field definition. So BG and BF are in fact not observable, okay? Because and that's you see from the from this expression that it's always this combination that appears in the S matrix element. So string field theory, yes, in a given string field theory, you can compute BG and BF separately. And they involve some terms like log lambda, for example, right? Where lambda is one of the parameters that enters the construction of string field theory. But at the end, lambda dependence is supposed to drop out because you can change lambda by field definition.
Ashok, could you
Yes,
say
fine.
again, please, why is equal 0 is only determined indirectly?
Here, oh, because I mean, if you want to do a direct calculation, right, what it will involve is that we need to basically evaluate this diagram, right? We have to evaluate this diagram and also torus with one hole. Right? These diagrams have not been explicitly written down. Once we write down an expression like this for those diagrams, then you can use string field theory to regulate the divergences and get the result. Right? But it's just much more complicated calculation. It's more like a genus 2 calculation, right? And that's why this has not been done in a fully systematic way.
Okay.
So this argument, this indirect argument that I gave is basically based on the assumption that the d instant on action in string field theory should match the matrix model instant on action. Okay? That's what gives the C equal to 0. But that in general may fail, right? I mean, when you compare string theory with a matrix model, you are supposed to compare only the on-shell S matrix elements, right? And not the instant on actions. But if you are willing to accept that the instant on action should agree, the renormalized instant on action should agree, then you can argue that C should be 0 from the string theory side. That's why I've said it's an indirect argument.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions at this stage? Okay, so if not, what I'll do in the rest of the talk is to just give one example, okay, of how the calculations are done. Okay. And I'll focus on this normalization factor, okay, because in a sense it's conceptually hardest, but technically simplest. Okay, so let me try to do that in the time that I have left. So this I have already said, the calculation of n is technically simpler, but conceptually more subtle. So the naive Walsh expression for this I have already written down. Okay, so it's I times exponential of the annulus amplitude. And here I have written the annulus in general, okay, for a general string theory, not necessarily for this 2-dimensional string theory. Okay. So it's given by this integral of trace e to the minus 2 pi t L naught. Okay, t is a modular parameter. So that's given by the sum over all the bosonic states and minus all the fermionic states. So these are the L0 eigenvalues of the bosonic and fermionic open string states. Now you may ask that in a bosonic string theory, how do you get fermionic open string states? And the reason is that we also have ghosts. Okay, and we will see where the fermionic states are coming from. Okay, basically they are coming from the ghosts. The other point I want to emphasize here is that because the annulus has ghost 0 modes, okay, we have to insert a projection operator B0 C0 in the annulus amplitude. So this trace has a hidden projection operator B0 C0. Okay, so these are the B and C ghosts, the zero modes are the B and C ghosts. And that basically ensures that the trace, that the sum over states here runs only over states that satisfy this condition, that which are annotated by B0C times S. Because this projection operator basically projects onto the B0S equal to 0 states. Now, A diverges in string theory, and we saw already an example, and the divergence comes because of the states with L0 less than or equal to 0. Because you can see that T goes to infinity if the HIB is negative or 0, or if HIF is negative or 0, then these blow up. Okay, so that's the origin of the divergence. So for the two-dimensional string theory, this is the expression for the annulus amplitude. And I'll rewrite this as a 2 to the 2 pi t plus 1 minus 2, and that's because there are actually two bosonic modes and two fermionic modes in this case. Okay, that's why I've rewritten it this way. Now, if you compare it to the general result, we see that because the exponent doesn't contain any negative parts of e to the 2 pi t, the contribution from all the L0 positive states cancel. Okay, already. So you don't have to do anything about the L0 positive states. So we can just focus on the finite number of L0 less than or equal to 0 modes. So for bosons, okay, that here are the bosonic open string states, okay, with L0 less than or equal to 0. So this is the tachyonic mode with L0 equal to -1. And this, in fact, is the massless mode, or the 0 mode, that corresponds to translation of the D instanton in the time direction. So alpha is the oscillator of the Euclidean time coordinate. So this is L0 equal to 0. And here are the two ghost modes. Okay, these are the ghost fields. The fermionic modes, okay, the vacuum as well as C1, C minus 1, C1 in the vacuum. That's what this explains why this is two bosonic and two fermionic modes. Now this amplitude, typically in all consistent string theories, okay, by which I mean that the string theories which do not have closed string tachyons, this in fact goes to 0 as t goes to 0. So the integral is finite. There is no divergence from the t goes to 0 end. And this means that the effective number of bosonic and fermionic modes are equal, right? Because as t goes to 0, these two cancel. And this certainly is a case in the example that you are considering, right? As t goes to 0, this just goes to 0. So in this case, we can carry out the integral explicitly, analytically, assuming that these are positive. Okay, so you have to basically write these, the results when they are positive, and then reinterpret this as a path integral. So in that case, we write, this is the expression for the amplitude. And now the idea is that we want to rewrite this as a path integral, which is given here. So here the B are the bosonic modes. The integral runs over the number of bosonic modes that are present in this, the number of i's that are present in this sum. And the fermions always come in pairs. Okay, so I have introduced F and F tilde. So this runs over the sum of pairs. So together Fg and Fg tilde span all the fermionic modes that come here. And this is an identity. A can be expressed like this for positive HIF and HIB. So the idea is that we will now try to take this as a definition of the annulus amplitude and see how we can interpret this. Okay, how we can interpret the divergences. Okay, so of course we have not removed the divergences yet, right? Because this integral as it stands does diverge from whenever bi square is, whenever HIB is negative or 0, and similarly when HIF is 0. So you have not gotten rid of the divergences. Okay, the only thing we have done is that we have rewritten the annulus amplitude as a path integral over these modes B and F. So the task now is to interpret this as a Siegel gauge fixed path integral of a gauge invariant string field theory. So Siegel gauge, let me remind you, I mean, it's a technical definition. It's basically is this condition that we sum over states with B0 is equal to 0. So what we want to do now is that this integral is ill-defined. Okay, whenever HIB is negative or 0 or HIF is 0. But you want to interpret this as a single gauge fixed path integral of a gauge invariant string field theory. Then you want to show that the ambiguities that we encounter associated with the zero modes essentially arise due to breakdown of the single gauge choice. Okay, the gauge fixing, the problem is with the gauge fixing. Then we are going to use a gauge invariant path integral to evaluate the C to the A, and that will give a finite result. Okay, and that's the idea. And we'll see how it goes. Okay, but here I should just add that because the open strings on the D instantons do not carry any continuous momentum, when you talk about string field theory, it's really a zero-dimensional field theory. Okay, you can see already here, right? These integrals are just a finite number of integrals. So even though I'm calling this as a path integral in string field theory, in fact, the simplest kind of integrals that you can think of, a finite number of integrals over a set of discrete modes. Okay, no continuous, no path integral is necessary. Okay, even though I'm calling it a path integral. Okay, so now let me say maybe I should skip this part and I'll give the final result. Okay, since I started at 4:35, I think, right? So I have about 15 minutes.
Sorry. Yes. 15.
Okay. So maybe I go through this a little more detail. Okay. So let's define the ghost number of open string states, okay, by assigning C and C bar as ghost number 1, B and B bar as ghost number -1, and matter as ghost number 0. This is a standard ghost number assignment. And you introduce a set of basis states, phi and r, okay, as a set of states of ghost number n. And because you are considering open string states with L0 less than or equal to 0, this list in fact is finite. Okay. And here I have written down all the states, okay, that have ghost number that have L0 less than or equal to 0. Okay. And I have marked these 3 states in green. Okay, these are special, okay, because they carry host number 1, as you can see, right? And the host number 1 states play a special role, okay, that I'll make in string field theory that I'm going to describe in the next slide. And this I have already said, alpha -1 is the oscillator of the Euclidean time. So in open string field theory, the classical string field psi is an arbitrary state of host number 1. What this means specifically is that if we take an arbitrary string state of host number 1, we can expand it in this basis, because this is the basis of states of host number 1. Then psi r has the dynamical degrees of freedom of the theory. Okay? That's what I mean by classical string field is a state of host number 1. And so we see from the previous slide that there should be 3 classical mode of the string. Right? This is this open string field theory on the D instanton. The relevant part of the open string field theory on the D instanton basically is 3 discrete variables. That's all. Okay, the coefficients of these 3. And the quadratic part of the gauge invariant classical action also has a simple form. This is simply the matrix element of QB between these state psi. Okay. So this gives you some quadratic term involving the psi r's. QB here is a BRST chart of the worldsheet theory. Now this theory also has gauge transformation. The gauge transformation parameters of the classical open string field theory are described by an arbitrary state theta of host number 0. So again, to make it more explicit, okay, we just expand a state of host number 0 in a basis. Okay, this is the basis of states of host number 0. The coefficients of expansion I'm calling theta u. These become the gauge transformation parameters of string field theory. And the gauge transformation laws of string field theory is this. And you can easily verify that under this transformation, the action that I wrote down is invariant, okay, because QB square is 0. So using this gauge transformation law, we can actually explicitly work out how these 3 components, psi 0, psi 1, and psi 2, okay, if we call them psi 0, psi 1, psi 2, okay, how they transform under the thetas, under the gauge transformation parameters. And the number of gauge transformation parameters in this case, in fact, is just 1. Okay, that also you can read out from this list. Right? So since the gauge transformation parameter of our states of host number 0, right? In fact, this is the only one of host number 0. Okay. So there is 1 gauge transformation parameter and 3 fields. Right? That's all the content of the theory. And now we write down the partition function of the gauge invariant formalism. And that's the standard partition function that you normally write down, integral over psi r e to the minus the action divided by the volume of the gauge group. And at this stage, I should just say that the normalization of I that I have defined here is completely arbitrary. You could have multiplied this by any constant c, and the final result will not be affected by this. Okay, so this you can take as a definition of IGI. The path integral weighted by the e to the minus action divided by the volume of the gauge group. And now the idea is that since we know the gauge transformation laws, we can use a standard Fourier-Popov formalism to gauge fix. And the gauge fixing we do by in the Siegel gauge. Okay, let's suppose this is the standard gauge fixing that one uses in string field theory. So if you use the Siegel gauge condition, B0 psi equal to 0, then you can see, okay, this is the expression for psi that in this case. And B0 psi equal to 0 means that B0 annihilates this state. B0 also annihilates this state. So the only state that B0 doesn't annihilate is this one. So B0 psi equal to 0 will basically set psi 1 equal to 0. And you will be left with path integral over two fields, two bosonic fields, psi 0 and phi. But of course, you have to introduce also ghost fields, right? Because the determinant that you get from a change of variable from psi 1 to theta have to be taken into account. And those ghost fields that we saw are precisely the Fourier-Popov ghosts. So you can show that if you gauge fix this by the standard Fourier-Popov method, you end up with exactly the integral that you had found, the expression for the exponential of the annulus amplitude, except for the 2 pi factors. The 2 pi factors, the e to the a had a dBi over square root of 2 pi. Here the 2 pi factors are not there. But that's because you have not, in the definition of IGI, I have not included in it 1 over square root of 2 pi. Right? So that's not very relevant. But with this definition, the result is that IGI is equal to 2 pi to the NB over 2 times e to the a. But NB is simply the number of bosonic modes in the Siegel gauge, right? Because you basically lose this 1 over square root of 2 pi from each of these integrals. So this is the expression now. So the idea now is that we equate this with this. NB in the present case is just 2, right? These are the only two, psi 0 and phi are the two Siegel gauge modes that are left over. So NB is 2, so e to the a is just 1 over 2 pi times this integral. And now the idea is that this integral we'll argue is perfectly well defined, and we'll evaluate this and see what we get. Now here the psi 0 and psi 1 integrals have to be done because this is saddle point, right? We are doing a path integral around the saddle point. So by the standard saddle point technique, we'll integrate over psi 0 and psi 1 by choosing the integration contour to be along the steepest descent contours. And that essentially gives a factor of I from each of these integrals. And we can do the integral explicitly and we get a factor of minus pi root. So that minus pi root 2 combines with this 1 over 2 pi to give you minus 1 over root 2 times this integral over phi over integral over theta. So these are genuine zero modes, okay, but we will now see that these can be physically interpreted and you can actually carry out these integrals explicitly, what this means. Okay. So here it is, okay, so we are now with this integral. Okay. Now the phi, okay, if we remember, okay, phi was the coefficient of this mode, right? And this we had said is the mode that translates the d-instanton. So phi roughly is the collective mode of the d-instanton that translates it along the time direction. Theta, on the other hand, is the gauge transformation parameter that multiplies this vacuum state, okay, which is the BRST invariant state. Okay. So phi is clearly related to the d-instanton location phi field along the time direction. Okay. And theta, one can show, is related to the rigid U1 symmetry. Okay, the U1 symmetry is there on all d-branes, including the d-instanton. Okay. And what this rigid U1 symmetry transformation does is that if we take a open string that connects the d instanton to another d instanton, okay, second d instanton, then it gives a phase of to the I theta tilde to this open string state. Okay, that's the definition of a rigid U1. So theta, the string field theory Gates transformation parameter theta can be shown to be related to this rigid U1 transformation theta tilde, and phi can be shown to be related to phi tilde. Now, when I say that they can be related, okay, the precise relation one can find out by doing some explicit string amplitude computation, because you basically have to look at what the Gates transformation in string field theory is and compare with the Gates transformation that you get from this. Similarly, one has to understand what you get in string field theory when you give phi a vacuum expectation value, and compare this with what you get when you actually change the location of the d instanton by a certain amount. By doing these comparisons, we can find that the relationship between phi and phi tilde has this structure, and the relation between theta and theta tilde has this structure. So you can now replace this integral over phi by integral over phi tilde and integral over theta by integral over theta tilde. Okay, so this is what I have done here. Okay, so this, I'm not done.
Ashok? Okay, so Ashok,
Yes,
so,
go ahead, please.
you are here, right?
Sorry, was there a problem with my internet?
Yeah, you were interrupted for a few seconds.
Okay, so should I repeat some part of it?
Just start page 34.
Page 34. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is, I didn't really say very much because these are just the previous equations. Okay, whatever equation appeared in page 33 is here. And now I'm saying that theta tilde has period 2 pi. Okay, this you can see because by definition, okay, what theta tilde does is to give a phasor to the I theta tilde, to the open strings. So if you change theta tilde by 2 pi, nothing changes. So theta tilde integral will give you 2 pi. Okay, so you just substitute theta in terms of theta tilde and use this. Similarly, after you substitute phi in terms of phi tilde, okay, you get a normalization factor. And then the phi tilde integral generates the energy conserving delta function, 2 pi delta omega. And this has to be, of course, at the very end. Okay. This is not counted as part of the normalization factor. In fact, when you wrote down the result, okay, the 2 pi delta omega we had written down separately. Okay. So the phi tilde integral can be dropped. Okay. And what we have is minus 1 over root 2 times here the normalization that takes you from phi to phi tilde, that's here. And the normalization that takes you from theta to theta tilde, that's this here. And then 1 over 2 pi because the theta tilde integral gives you 1 over 2 pi. So that ultimately gives a factor of I over 4 pi square for e to the a. Now we are almost done, but not quite. Okay, so let me take next 2 or 3 minutes to explain what remains to be done. Okay. And this has to do with what we normally call the multiplier factor. Okay, in the when you are trying to use the saddle point method to evaluate an integral. So as we have said, what we have computed is a leading contribution from the steepest descent contour around the instanton. But is that the right thing to do? Right? How do you know that the steepest descent contour is the right contour to choose? So the question that you have to now ask is how does the steepest descent contour around the instanton actually fit inside the full contour around which the path integral is to be performed? And for this, it's enough to look at the open string tachyonic mode, okay, because the other mode, the psi1 mode is actually an auxiliary field. Okay, so there you do the full integral. Okay. But if you look at the open string tachyon mode on the d instanton, the tachyon potential, in fact, was studied in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it's known that the tachyon potential has a shape like this. So the psi naught equal to 0 is the maximum of the tachyon potential. Of course, it's the tachyonic mode. This represents the original d instanton. It was known that at psi, there is a minimum of this tachyon potential at some value of psi naught, which is 1 over a. This describes a perturbative vacuum, okay, where the d instanton is absent. And it's also known that the potential is unbounded from below on the left hand side as psi naught goes to minus infinity. So this means that the natural choice of integration contour, that psi naught, you integrate psi naught along the real axis. This cannot be taken to be the definition of the path integral, the original path integral over psi 0. Because the weight factor, which is e to the minus s, right, which contains e to the minus p factor, this actually goes to infinity as psi 0 goes to minus infinity, right? So if we just take the integration contour to be along the real axis, then this factor blows up. Okay, so that's not a sensible integral. On the other hand, we know that the psi naught integration contour must pass through the perturbative vacuum, right? Because otherwise you lose the perturbative contribution to the amplitudes. So the contour must pass through the perturbative vacuum, right? So which means in this side, on this side, the contour should go like this, okay, along the real axis. So after a little thought, one can convince oneself that the only correct choice of integration contour is this one, where the contour comes to the saddle point, the d-instanton saddle point from the negative imaginary side, and then it goes over along the real axis just to include the perturbative vacuum. Now, if you compare this with the actual steepest descent contour, that comes from minus I infinity and goes to plus I infinity. Okay, that goes like this. Okay, near the instanton, it just goes along the imaginary axis. So what this shows is that only half of the steepest descent contour is actually part of the full integration contour of the theory. So the actual normalization will be given by I. This fact, in fact, the I is the common factor for S matrix. Then the C to the A, that expression that we had found, and then there is an extra factor of half. And when you combine this, you get minus 1 over 8 pi square, and that's exactly in agreement with the matrix model result. So this basically is the finishes the calculation of the normalization factor N. And now I'm in my final slide. Okay, so let me just make some final remarks and stop. So what I have tried to do in this talk is to focus on d-instantons in two-dimensional bosonic string theory. But as I've emphasized many times, the d-instantons are present in many string theories, okay, including type 2b string theory. And the problems that we encountered, that we discussed, are also universal problems for all d-instantons. For example, the breakdown of the Siegel gauge. Okay, this is a universal problem. The translation zero modes. Okay, this again is a universal problem. D-instantons means that you are localizing along the time direction. So there are zero modes of the d-instanton. The Ricci D1 transformation is also a universal problem. So all of these will appear also in d-instantons in superstring theory. And the string field theory for superstrings is well established by now, and it can be used to address these issues. So this in principle gives a fully systematic procedure for computing d-instanton contribution to string amplitudes. And what it does is to provide a window into the non-perturbative aspects of string theory. But the techniques that we use are purely perturbative. Right? We are still using the same Walsh formalism, right? Except that we have some d-instanton boundary condition. So this provides a window into non-perturbative physics using perturbative techniques. So I think with this I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. Let's thank the speaker, maybe, if you want to unlock your microphone.
Thank you.
Is there a question? Yeah, Bernard?
It was a mistake, sorry.
Ah. Yeah, if there are no questions, let me ask.
I have. Oh, go ahead, sir. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sharing an office, so we'll have. Just once. Go ahead. I'll make. Go ahead, and I'll ask.
Okay. Ashok, when one considers d-instanton like in the original Green-Pearl paper, like in type 2 superstring, do you think that your method could allow to compute the power of G-string of the leading instanton contribution? Because this G-string factor is fractional, and it's kind of strange from...
Yeah, actually, the G-string factor, that power has already been understood in the Harvard group. They have been working on this problem. Right? They are, in fact, were working on the corrections, right? Not the normalization factor, but they did look at the normalization factors, and that fractional part precisely is what comes out of the zero mode analysis.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, basically what happens is that these scalings that I described here, right? You see this GO appearing, G open string, right? And GO actually is the square root of GS, okay, because it's open string coupling. And that gives the fractional part.
I see.
What I have also checked is that if you follow the same procedure, the factors of pi work out correctly. What in the normalization, what I have not checked so far is whether the factors of 2 work out correctly. Okay, that requires a little more work, but it's basically doing some algebra.
So is that something that you checked, or is something which is published in the paper?
No, it's not published. This type 2B, nothing is published, right? The open string coupling dependence, this was in fact, I also checked, but this has also been checked by the Harvard group earlier. That the dependence on the coupling, the fractional part that you are mentioning, right? I think it's GS to the 3/2 or something. That comes out correctly in this analysis. But what I have checked is that the factors of pi that you get in that thing, that also comes out correctly.
Okay.
But
I have a related
take
question.
a little more work to figure out the factors of 2. Okay, and to verify that what they found from type 2B S duality analysis is exactly what you get from the DN center.
So there are, yeah, okay. The rational factor is not fixed.
Yeah, the rational factor is not fixed, exactly.
The question I wanted to ask Ashok was regarding when you go away from this two-dimensional example. I guess the fact that the path integrals are actually just integrals. This was related to the momenta being absent because of the Dirichlet boundary condition. So that's going to be a general feature that we don't have to worry about path integrals, but just simple integrals.
Exactly, yeah. So that is the generic feature. In fact, we just do simple integral.
There is one more case where there is a correspondence between a D instanton and another instanton, and this is in the context of the ADS CFT, where D instantons in ADS correspond to Yang-Mills instantons. Now, this has been checked in the past, and most features were found to agree, but subtle points were not addressed. Do you think that these techniques could also match things there?
I think it could, except that I think the various papers of Mike Green and his collaborators have already used S duality to fix most of what has to be fixed on the type 2B side, right? And what these techniques should be able to do is to verify what whatever results they have gotten from S duality, right?
That's right.
It should be one should be able to verify using these techniques, by especially D-instanton computation.
Okay.
And then those have to be compared with what you get from the Yang-Mills side.
Thank you.
Is there other questions? Well, if not, let's thank Ashok again.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ashok.
Thank
Very
you.
nice talk.
Thank you.